and you get what you always got. Please feel free to leave your camera on if you're able to, and allow us to see your interaction. And there'll be opportunities, of course, to interact as we go along. Welcome, those of you that have arrived already. I can see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. So welcome here. Greeting to everyone. We'll start in just a moment. But if you can see the title screen, you'll know that you're hopefully in the right place, or just luck or the universe has brought you here, and this is exactly where you're supposed to be. All right. So I can't see how we're doing, but I think we're okay. Welcome, welcome. Good to see everybody who's here already. And we'll get going in just a moment. Super. Well, I'll start the webinar at this point then and just say that this is the first in a series of 3 webinars that we're offering. One today, one tomorrow on becoming confident, and one next week on all about speeding up your teaming and making your teams more effective. You're welcome to join us for those as well, and we'll put some links in the chat a little bit later. I'm Craig McKenzie. I am head of Academy and Team Coaching with Transcend International, and I'm joined today by Tony Dickel, who's our chairman and CEO. Say hello, Tony.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you all here.
All
Hopefully,
right.
you're going to have a great time today.
Well, as we were reflecting over the last while on, what we do and how it all works, we've really started to move into helping you, anybody that is, benefit from the work we do and all the work that we've done to develop our coach training programs and all the work we've done with clients over the last 20 years. So this is one of those nuggets that we often say, but we haven't really gone deep into. And we sometimes say this when we're training coaches, this whole idea, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got, which means we need to change possibly what we're doing, but even more than that. So there's 3 assumptions that we have as we greet you all and invite you all into this. The first is you have a problem. There is something you are getting. You have something that you don't want in your life. We also assume that you want, wish, hope, desire to get something else other than that. And that's important. There needs to be some will to change that equation. And then we also assume that you're willing to learn, and that willingness includes letting us take you on a little experiential learning journey. And the best way to work through this is to experience it yourself. So we've created a series of reflections along each of those 3 questions that we're going to work through. And we want to take you along on that ride so that you're engaged, but with your own stuff. Now, we're not going to require anyone to share. You can keep it to yourself, but we will give you opportunity to put it in the chat. We'll give you opportunity to unmute yourself or mic yourself, and happy to have you share as well, if you're willing to do that. We're a small enough group that we can have a conversation as well. So this is about you, not necessarily about helping others, and we certainly will be happy to speak with you about how we train coaches to help other people or how we could coach you through these things as well. So the first thing we need to do is get you just to fill in the blank. Now, this is for yourself. You can put it in the chat. Better if you just write it down or capture it some way. What is it that you don't want? What would you put in that blank? What is it you're getting that you wish you weren't getting? And then once you've done that, as succinctly as possible, as unedited as possible, then if you have the ability to think, what do you want instead of that? What do you want instead of that? So you're not getting something, or you're getting something you don't want. What would you like instead? And again, just fill in that blank. And you don't need to share it in the chat, but keep it in your mind as we talk through sort of the answers to the main questions of this session. We're going to invite you to do that. Thanks, Juliet. Beautiful. Sick. What you don't want is to be sick.
Can I just add something to
Right.
this little thing?
Yeah,
You
please.
could, so in terms of this, what is it that you don't want? It could be either an outcome, some kind of outcome, or it could be a behavior that you do not want to produce, a behavior that you are producing in a particular situation that maybe you would rather not produce in that situation. Maybe you've been given feedback or something like that, that you're behaving in a certain way, but somehow it just doesn't change. You'd like it to,
Beautiful.
but it doesn't. Yeah.
Excellent. So keep that in your mind, and yeah, feel free to interact. I love that, Juliet. Nice. So we've covered the three assumptions. What we're going to do is help answer these three questions: why we do what we do, why we don't do what we know we need to do. Of course, assumes that we might have some idea on what we might need to do differently, or at least we know we should do something differently. And then the next thing is what to do. What's some possibilities for that? And then we'll take some time at the end for some questions and answers and give you that opportunity. So with that said, let's go to that first question. Why do we do what we do? Tony?
Right. So basically, what is it that drives our existing behavior? And I'd like to quote from a neuroscientist called Richie Davidson here, where he says that somewhere between 99 and 99.99% of everything that we do, every behavior that we produce relative to a situation that's arising around us, is completely automatic. We don't really have free will. It's automatic. So where does this automatic behavior come from? So if you think about, how we walk through our world, there are things happening to us from time to time, and occasionally something comes up that is, we call it salient. So salient means that something is happening that we take as being meaningful in some way. It might be that we're in a meeting and somebody rolls their eyes at us or disagrees with us, and for some reason, we regard this as being a salient sensory event. It's like it creates an interrupt, an alarm for us. And then what we do with that event that happens, that arises in one of our senses, it might be a visual sense, something we read on email, could be something we hear in a meeting or in a one-to-one meeting with somebody, just an event that comes into a sensory field. And by the way, that could include a thought that comes up into the mind, which is picked up by the mind and then interpreted by the mind. And what the mind automatically does beneath our conscious awareness is it takes that event and it tries to work out what that event means to us. And so what does it mean for us either now or in our normally short-term future? Is it good for us? Is it bad for us? Or isn't it particularly, do we appraise it as not being particularly important when we have another look at it? So if it turns out that the prediction that we are subconsciously making is that this event that's happening now is going to be bad for us either now or sometime in our future, we develop a somewhat immediate negative emotion, which is then attached to a storyline about what it is that might happen to us if, and we don't know that we're telling ourselves that storyline. But the emotion plus the story that we begin to tell ourselves then drives a behavior that is designed to cope with an uncomfortable emotion that arises in the moment. So if the prediction is that something's going to be good for us, then we generate a positive emotion that tends to drive us towards something. If the prediction is that this is going to be bad for us, then we develop a negative emotion that creates a strategy of behavior that is designed to remove that emotion. So, for example, somebody, let's say, disagrees with you in a meeting, and you decide that this needs to be attended to and dealt with. the way that you might cope with that is you might interrupt and get defensive or aggressive in the moment. All driven by an emotion that comes up, driven by a prediction that what's happening in this moment is threatening for me, it's bad for me. That makes sense. All right, so that's really what is driving what we call our autopilot. Something happens in the moment, we create an autopilot prediction about what it means for us, and then we have an automatic reaction or an autopilot reaction to the prediction that we're making that then creates a behavior in what we call the moment of choice. Okay, so that's how all that works. Any questions on that? No. Good. And again, it's all, most of this is happening. This is why we say that it's so difficult to change. Unless you know how to, unless you know how to make changes. And we're going to talk about that later on, of course. But even changing simple things like avoiding interrupting people or avoiding rolling your eyes or not avoiding conflict when you actually need to engage in conflict. All of these things, people will say, oh, you need to change that. But actually changing it is really difficult for most people. It's not a trivial thing to create new behavior.
So again, back to what you had in your mind before of what it is you don't want and what it is you'd want instead. We want you to add to that reflection and this image of, someone else is driving the car, autopilot has taken over. So what are you doing instead of what you wish you could do? So try to get a image of that, a word or two that comes to mind. And then if you can take it one step further, what is driving what it is you're doing? And this refers back to where Tony talked about those emotions, those predictions, those desires, not for something to be the way it was, like discomfort with a feeling or discomfort with a prediction about the future. I'm trying to get a sense for that. And again, you don't have to share it, but this is for your own journey, for you to begin to figure this out. Now, of course, in our coaching approach, we would be answering these questions in a dialogue in a very safe environment. And as a coach, you'd be learning how to do this. And of course, if we were coaching, it would be a similar kind of relation. So with that in mind, why don't we do what we know we need to do? Now, there is an assumption in this statement, which, of course, I've alluded to earlier, which is that we have some sense of knowing what we need to do. So, for example, Tony shared about, you want to interrupt because you want to defend yourself because you felt that somebody had said something that was negative about you or given some feedback. So there's a whole cycle of things that could be what we know we should do instead of that. That could be as from the fact that we just be quiet, or we don't take it personally, or we choose to take it offline, or we wait, or we have a more respectful interpretation, or whatever that happens to be. Or it could be stand up for ourselves in a way that's not defensive. So all kinds of things we could do. So why don't we do that? Well, the first is this autopilot override. It's just happened. In that last sort of piece that Tony had with sort of the zebra stripes on it is that autopilot reaction. We've already reacted. Why don't we do what we know we need to do? We've already done what we didn't want to do. So it's irrelevant at that point. We've already missed the opportunity. So that's one reason.
So Greg, I just want to say something if I may.
Yeah, please.
The autopilot actually serves us very well most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if we didn't have an autopilot, we would wake up in the morning and we wouldn't know what to do when we kind of sat up. So the autopilot will work very, very well for us until it doesn't, until there is something that we actually need to change that is being driven by some event that's happened to us in the past that we've actually forgotten about.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's that knowing, right? We've decided we'd like to do something different. We'd love to do something different, but the autopilot has already done it, what it always does. And that's a good thing for us to notice if we can notice it.
The autopilot takes you off the end of a cliff, unfortunately, some of the time.
The same cliff over and over again.
Yeah.
in some cases. The second is distractions. Just other stuff has come into our field, whether it's an emotional distraction, it's a noise distraction, it's someone doing something, it's a physical feeling. All kinds of things can distract us. But we might not know what we might not do what we know we need to do because we're distracted by something else in the system around us, in our own mind, or in the room. Or the third reason is our mind autopilotly decides for us that something else is better, or something else is more important, or something else is worth more in that moment, right? Because what we know we need to do is about the future, who we would love to be and how we would love to be perceived. But what we do in the moment is often about the present moment. So in this moment, I feel uncomfortable, and my mind decides it's better to feel comfortable. So I do something to make myself feel more comfortable, autopilot like, or react. Or I decide that something's more important. I want to make someone else feel small, or something's worth more. I want to suck it up in that moment and don't step into the conflict that I need to step into, or don't step into the conversation in a productive way. So those are different things, but they're all things that our mind does in service of making us do something which is better in our mind's mind in that moment.
Right,
Yeah,
remembering that
please.
for most of us, the prime directive of the subconscious mind is to keep us emotionally safe, to
That's
avoid
true.
difficult emotions from appearing in our body. Because the
Mm,
subconscious mind tells us that these uncomfortable emotions cannot be borne. Because when you first experienced a particular emotion, when you were younger, it was probably very, very painful. If you've ever had a parent telling you that you're not good enough, for example, at the first time that that happened, that would have been an extremely uncomfortable emotion that you told yourself you never wanted to see in your body ever again, or feel in your body ever again. And that's
uh,
where it all originates from. And then we layer more and more and more things on top of that. And we generalize these negative emotions to other similar related things without knowing that we're actually creating a memory of a future emotion in our mind, of a past emotion, and throwing it out into the future and saying, I'm going to experience this emotion again, and I'm not going to be able to cope with it. So therefore, I need to undertake some avoidance strategy to try to soothe it right here, right now. So we'll talk later on about how we can be aware
and we
of
can do
this,
something about that.
what we can do about it. Yeah.
So let's come back to you. How does your mind sometimes get in your way? So again, this is a reflection. It's for you to write something down, to type it, to do whatever you do with it, to think about it. What are some of the patterns you're noticing about how your mind gets in the way? And the more you can avoid editing this and just sort of say what it is, the better. If you can say, avoidance or whatever it is, the more you can create a little bit cleaner sense of what's happening with you. So I'll give you just a minute to do that. All right. So now you have these reflections. You have what you don't want. You have what you want instead. You have who's driving, what's happening, what's driving. That's sort of why you do what you do. And now we're talking about what are some of you maybe having some awareness on what it is that gets in the way of that change. And this is not easy. If it was easy, we would be changed. I often say, if someone could change on their own, they wouldn't need a coach. They wouldn't need a mentor. They wouldn't need a counselor. They wouldn't need someone to help them with that. So, those of us that work in those helping professions, we support people to create the awareness and things that they need to change. So, what do we do? First of all, if we keep doing what we've always done, we need to change that in some ways. We must change something. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to share through a model that is the foundation of our coaching approach and also our coach training approach, and particularly the more advanced levels of our coach training. So we have a sort of a two-stage program, and this material is more related to that stage too. So it's slightly more advanced, and we're going to just walk you through a model and giving you some tips about what you might want to change and what you could possibly experiment with. That's the image of that happy bag-headed guy who's doing some experiments. So we'd suggest you take it on as an experiment rather than a have to do. So as Tony shares through these kinds of things you could be doing, try to choose one, just one. Don't overload yourself. Just choose one, because to work on any of them is kind of to work on all of them. But choose one thing that might work for you to begin to experiment with. So with that, I'll stop sharing, and Tony will take us through the next phase of slides. And again, your task is just to choose something. And at the end of this, we'll invite you again to put it in the chat, to share, to do something with that, so that we can interact a little bit. All right. Thanks, Tony.
Okay. Can you see my slide there, Craig? Yeah. Can you hear me? Anyone? Okay, very good.
All good.
All right. So here's a model. We call this model the quantum theory of human behavior. You know, it's a metaphor, because what you can basically say that everything about what we do now is covered by this model in terms of why we do it, and everything that needs to change about what we do now it means that we need to make changes to elements across these kind of four quadrants of our experience. And we call this I'm just trying to work out how to advance the slide. Okay, so we call it the MACE model, which stands for motivational, attentional, cognitive, and emotional capability. Motivational, attentional, and cognitive capability. But just look at what we mean by these things together with some very brief at this stage, because there's a lot of depth, of course, in all of this, as some of the people that are on this webinar that have been through our training will know. There's so many things in each of these areas that we could talk about, and we can't do it justice in such a short space of time. But just in a very, very small nutshell, the starting point is often really having a full understanding of what it is that we actually really care about, what it is that we really want, which we call developing motivational capability. What do we want? And this really, once we've got that nailed, then it forms, if you wish, a compass that we can hold in our attention when things go wrong. Okay, because things are going to go wrong. It doesn't matter how badly you want something. The fact is, in the moment of choice, which is a moment where we have an opportunity to change a behavior that we are bringing, it's what we call the moment of choice. And it really is a moment, because so often, you might decide that you would love to change a behavior which causes you to go into combat with somebody because they disagree with you. But so often, it's happened even before you know that it's happened. And you're telling yourself, oh my God, not again. It happened again. Okay. So we need to hold a very, very clear vision of how we want to show up, which involves, knowing all of these things, values, what we care about, what are our aspirations for how we show up in the world. And a couple of things that we can do around this. We have techniques that we will show you called proprioceptive journaling. So this is really just taking a prompt, and there's a whole number of prompts, but a very, very good one might be the prompt, what I really care about is ... And that's your starting point. And you just write about that for 7 minutes without taking your pen off the paper. And then there's a process that you can follow to see what you're learning from that journaling exercise. And we say, you don't just do it once, you do it again and again and again and again, and see how it evolves over time. Another great prompt is the prompt, when I'm at my best, I'm ... And you'll come up with all sorts of things over time when you're getting your subconscious mind out of the way, or your conscious mind out of the way, so that the things that you really care about will come up from beneath the layers of the conscious mind. Being clear on how you want to show up. So forming a very clear view on how you would like to bring yourself into certain important moments of your life. In service of what? Mainly your happiness, where you're able to say to yourself, you know what? Maybe I didn't get quite what I want, but I know I did my best. I know I showed up skillfully in this situation. And if you do that again and again and again, show up in line with how you would love to show up in a particular situation, then there is a higher probability, and this is an evidence-based statement that I'm making, there's a higher probability that if you show up in line with your values and your aspirations for yourself, then you're more likely actually to get what you want materially as well. But if you show up with the material aim front and center, then you might derail. So there's a lot behind that. So being clear about that. So again, when I'm at my best time is a really, really good prompt for that. I'm showing up like this when I'm at my best. Okay, so doing guided reflections or even just reflections with yourself on, for you, what are the causes and conditions for what we call genuine happiness for you? Okay, not necessarily material success, but what is it that brings you a sense of well-being and peace in your life? I'm happy and at peace when ... is another prompt that you can use in this journaling exercise. And perhaps finally, knowing how to set clear what we call well-formed goals that inspire action towards your values, towards what motivates you, towards what it is that you really care about, other than that which the mind is telling you in the moment of choice that you care about. Know this, the mind often gives you fake news about what you're caring about in the moment. And it drives behavior that actually 20 minutes later, you're having to clean up. It's taking you in the wrong direction. So what do you do about that? So again, that's about creating what we call CRISP. And CRISP actually is an acronym that stands for context-driven, impactive, resource, with knowledge of resources and interference, positive and impactful goals. So that's the CRISP acronym. Sorry, S stands for specific. Very, specific in it. You need to really know very, very clearly what it is that you want to change about yourself. So there's that. So, okay, so now you've got motivational balance nailed, but you still derail. And that's because the mind is a dangerous place and it tends to take us off track in the moment of choice. So how do we deal with that? Well, we need to develop an awareness of what are the stories that are going on in the mind that we're telling ourselves that obscure our attention to our goals, our values, our aspirations, the things that we really care about, and what we have maybe told ourselves that we need to do in order to get what we want rather than get what we're getting. So the mind has a habit of just driving us or wanting to drive us down the old autopilot by telling us stories that change is dangerous. To do what you need to do to get what you actually want is actually going to create it's not safe for you to do that. And so it will tend to want to take you down the old autopilot highway. So how do we deal with that? Well, we need to understand our self-talk. So we need to catch ourselves in the moment of choice and inquire, what am I telling myself about this right now? And is it true? So we need to look at the narrative that is driving our behavior, and we need to question it and see the often absurdity in our existing narrative. So we do that through narrative reframing techniques and a technique called laddering, which we like very much, which is just where so you see, the interesting thing is we have to catch ourselves first in the midst of the story. But if we're lucky enough to be able to catch ourselves telling us, telling ourselves this story, then we have the chance to actually inquire, what's the worst thing about what I'm telling myself here? Is this really dangerous for me to make this change? Because remember, our existing behavior is designed to keep us emotionally safe. But in fact, the story that is driving the emotion that is designed to keep us safe is more dangerous if we believe it to us than the consequence of letting it go. And that's a very interesting thing. So we need to see these stories for what they are, just stories, knowing that they are not in any sense really facts. Ask yourself, what are you caring about most right now? Is it your developmental goal or how you'd love to be able to show up in situations like this? Or is it some kind of hidden goal to keep that keeps you safe in the moment? What are you really caring about in the moment of choice? We need to have a look at that. We need to reframe the stories. We need to create alternative stories that also fit the facts so that we can actually move away from our behavior. Okay. But the ability to be able to reframe these unconstructive cognitive patterns that might drive emotional experience, therefore behavior, requires attentional capability that we'll talk about in a couple of moments. So those are the things that cognitive imbalances, as we call them, in the moment of choice, are the things that might take us off track. So now we know what we really care about. We know what's taking us off track. So now what? Well, now we need to develop what we call attentional capability or attentional balance, which is about knowing the distractions that are taking us off track, taking us away from what we're caring about, and making the appropriate adjustments in the moment. So in order to do this, of course, we need to maintain a very clear and calm mind because we need to be able to watch ourselves as we're going through our lives. And we call this metacognitive awareness. You may have heard of this. The ability to know what is happening with us without reacting to it in the moment. Just watching it, just for a few seconds. Nobody's going to kill us. It's going to be okay. There's no lion out there waiting to get us. We don't have to climb up a tree. We can perfectly well just sit and ask ourselves a few questions about what's going on with us right now and what do we actually want. But in order to do that, we need a calm mind. And of course, we need to be able to follow what we call the 2 rules of attentional balance, where rule number 1 is focus on what you choose, your goals, your aspirations, your what you've agreed maybe with a coach that you would like to practice in a particular moment. Focus on what you choose, not on what the mind is choosing for you. But secondly, of course, you need to choose the right thing to focus on. What is the right thing? We'll go back to motivational balance. That is the right thing. Your aspirations, your goals, your developmental practices are the things, not the distractions, not the emotions that are coming up that are trying to keep you safe. Okay, so that's what we do. So redirect and focus your attention on what is needed to be held in your attention so that you can act skillfully. So how do you do that? Well, there are a whole number of different practices that are able. So by the way, attentional balance is mediated by a part of the brain known as the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which actually is a very trainable part of the brain. And it can actually grow in activity and size through these practices, mindfulness practices, somatic awareness practices, including yoga, Tai Chi, other mind-body practices. But not only that, you can practice this without doing a moment of meditation. And there is a paper that I think will be circulated to you called Mindfulness Without Meditation that you can have a look at if you'd like to learn more about how to do that kind of thing. So we can train these things. And when we train, it's a bit like going to the gym and doing bicep curls. It trains this muscle of attention just under here, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex on both sides of the brain. And when that grows, you will find, without even knowing it, that you're able to do the right thing, even though the right thing is the more difficult thing for you. You'll be able to keep your attention on your goals, your values, the tasks that you need to do in the midst of physical, cognitive, or emotional distractions more easily, effortlessly. And you'll find that you're becoming less distractible and more resilient along the way. So that's a wonderful thing. So finally, the final capability in the MACE model is the emotional capability, the ability to know moment by moment what's going on in your emotional field and how is it impacting or how is it potentially impacting on your behavior. And once you have access to that knowing, then you can use that emotion skillfully to serve you, to serve your goals and your aspirations. And it's all, this is really about feeling emotions rather than becoming the emotion. So I often ask, when I'm doing this on in face-to-face sessions, for people to put their hand up if they've ever said words like "I am angry," and just about everybody does. And that's because how we feel. I am angry. We become anger in that moment. But actually, all that's happening is we are having a psychosomatic experience that is trying to drive us to a certain behavior. We aren't that emotion. We're having an experience that we are interpreting, that we're trying to cope with, that is driving a behavior. So if we see these emotions as a psychosomatic event that is happening with us rather than an existential event, i.e. we are becoming that, then we're much more likely to be able to have a look at this emotion as it arises, ask questions, be curious about it. What's actually happening in my body here? What is it that's happening in my body that is driving such a reaction? Have a look at it, focus on it. Just bear with me 1 second, if I may, because I've just noticed that the tips are not here in terms of how to deal with these emotions. But the main way that we do this is through somatic awareness practices, because most of us have very little idea what's going on in the body moment by moment. And we need to get what we call 1 second ahead of these emotions. We need to notice them before they have already driven a behavior. And you normally only get about 0.3 to 0.5 seconds to notice the emotion as it arises and be able to intercept it before it has already driven your behavior, often unskillful behavior in the moment of choice. So in order to do that, we need to get familiar with our body. And the ways of doing that, again, are mindfulness meditation practices, Tai Chi, yoga. We call them somatic awareness practices. And we very, very often use within our coaching program such practices to get people much more familiar with emotions so that they can feel them as they come up, so that they can intercept and be curious about them and reframe them before they've already created the unskillful action. So there you go. That's what I have to say about that for now.
Super, Tony, thanks. Yeah, so within all that, there's some ideas that we try to give you of things that you can do. And this is the chance for you to begin to think about what are you choosing to experiment with? So you don't have to, again, tell us what you want to change or whatever, unless you want to, but we'd love to begin to have a little bit of dialogue around what you might choose to experiment with. Now, Erica from our team has just put into the chat learning more about the MACE model. There's videos and articles that you can have a look at if you'd like to find more, and we'd love to talk to you about that if that's something that interests you. But we'd love also for you in this moment, if you're willing, to unmute yourself and say, here's what I want to experiment with, or I have a question about how I might experiment with this. And we could dialogue a little bit and find out what your journey has led you to at this point. So yeah, I was reflecting myself while Tony was talking, and I thought the thing that I need to do is that intersection between I'm more clear on what I want, but understanding how my values inform and give energy to that, so that I do it in a way that's more healthy. I find sometimes when I assert what I want or desire to sort of push for more of what I want, and my language is even bad, that I don't come across the way I'd love to come across. I'm thinking about, like, you know, I've done some work on my values, trying to figure out, okay, so if I look at this through some of my values, what does that look like differently? So love to hear from some of
Yeah.
you, please. Anybody have anything they want to put in the chat, or would you be willing to unmute yourself and have a word? Maybe stop the screen share, Tony, if you would, and we'll have a bit of a dialogue with the people that have chosen to remain. Anything coming up for any of you?
I'll give you another little hint as you're reflecting. Something that works very, very well for me is a little technique called neural priming. So neural priming is where firstly you need to catch yourself that maybe you're about to enter what I call a high risk event. You might be going into a meeting with somebody that you historically have problems with, and you form a clear idea of how you would like to show up in that meeting. Because maybe historically you don't show up so well in a particular meeting with a particular person, things go wrong. So what you do is you do a little mental rehearsal, maybe 10 minutes before you go into the meeting, of what might go wrong and how you would like to show up when it happens, or if it happens, how you would like to respond rather than react to what happens in that meeting. And you rehearse it through, and then you go into the meeting, and you will find that there is a subconscious part of the brain known as the reticular activating system. And you're more likely, when that thing does happen, you're more likely to remember how you wanted to show up. And you're more likely to be able to bring the behavior, the thoughts, the feelings, and therefore the behavior into the moment just when something is going wrong. So practicing these things actually gradually rewires the brain so that it becomes automatic, that when these things happen, then you automatically show up. You don't even have to think about it. You automatically show up the way that you would like to. So that's what I do neural priming a lot when I'm about to go into a meeting with somebody that gives me trouble.
Thanks, Tony.
Very useful technique.
All right. So again, anybody have anything they'd like to share about what is happening for you as you reflect? Sorry, you can see it's Julianne. Thank you, Julianne. All right. Well, look at that.
Anything you're curious about?
Yeah, or any questions you might have as well.
Evening, everybody. Where's on the MACE? Excuse me. Could have cleared my throat before muting or after muting. MACE. Where's motivational interviewing? That kind of technique is that? Would you put that into the MACE kind of framework?
We don't tend to use the motivational interviewing tool in its pure format. What we do, during a coaching process, we will spend quite a lot of time on developing an emotional connection to a particular goal or aspiration. So trying to, understand, it's not so much interviewing, it's more a sort of a dialogue between two people where we will inquire as to, at a fairly deep level, what are the changes that they would love to make, and form a very, very clear, emotionally connected view where the individual will become emotionally attached to the change that they need to make. And what we're trying to do is to re-predict you remember earlier on I mentioned that a person's behavior is often coming from a prediction that is made based on data that is coming into their senses right now, combined automatically with something from the past that has happened. Some normally traumatic emotional experience from the past, plus data in the present that is salient, creates prediction about the future and therefore reaction to that prediction. What we're trying to do through the work that we do with a client is to recreate or to create the memory of an alternative prediction of the future that could happen related to what's happening in this moment, if that makes any sense. I don't know if that really answers the question.
Yeah,
I mean, I think motivational interviewing is a lovely technique, and obviously we use parts of it in the work that we're doing, but it's slightly adapted, if you wish, for coaching purposes rather than therapeutic purposes. We need to help a person to re-predict their future so that new prediction becomes what we call a positive emotional attractor. It creates a positive emotion which is able to pull the person towards what they want rather than what they're getting now.
And that really comes back to that early slide, right, where we said, what do you don't want and what do you want? And that's that initial phase. And of course, in a very quick way, you can say something. But in a skillful coaching relationship, of course, we would spend a lot of time really helping people to really figure out what they want. Because as we often say, even if people think they know what they want, they probably don't want that. They might want something other than that. And even, as someone put in the writing earlier, they're sick or they're unhealthy or they're injured. That's what they don't want. That's pretty easy. But what do they want instead would be, to not be injured, which is something. But that's not necessarily something they can change. But then, we would want to work with people around that idea of how can you, what do you need to change in order to change the outcome? What can you do, in order to affect that in some way?
And of course,
and that's the core of what we do.
Yeah, and what's in common with the MI approach is, of course, we are being very empathic as we go through this process, because often when they contemplate, there's often a lot of resistance to making changes to behavior, because changes to behavior appear to, subconsciously are perceived as being unsafe. It's the existing behavior is protecting us from some past emotion that we don't want coming back into our body because we don't think we can cope with it. And quite often we do get, some quite dramatic reactions when we make inquiries about the behavior. And we don't dig. Remember, we're not necessarily doing psychotherapy here. We're working with people who theoretically are able to bypass their old narrative and focus on what they want rather than what they're getting. And some people just can't do that. They go around what we call a circle of pain, and they can't jettison the old stories. So we need a lot of compassion as we're going through this process.
That's for sure. And thanks, Tony, for that answer. And Serge also has put in the chat, moving from procrastination to motivation. And Arn likes the idea of prediction of the brain, of course, changing the prediction of the brain, or changing our ability to do something different when our brain tells us something. So we'll take some moments for questions in a minute, but would love to just connect with you. So what else can you do if you're getting something that you don't want and you want to change it? One way that you can change that is to get coaching from a skillful professional coach. And the type of coaching we're talking about here is not the same kind of coaching that you can access through AI coaches, through coach bots, or through certain coaches. You need to, if you really want to change, you might need to do a little bit of work to find someone that has more skill in that area. We'd love to help you find someone like that from our alumni or from our faculty base or our staff. You can also help others. A lot of the people that attend our webinars are really interested in helping other people more than they're interested in necessarily helping themselves, which is great. Sometimes we're like landscapers who have ugly yards, or mechanics who have broken cars. Sometimes those of us that help others don't always tend to ourselves, but our passion is that we would help you to be really skillful. So, what we actually do is coach people and leaders and train coaches who are really skillful in helping people discover what they want, what they need to change, and what they need to not forget in moments of choice. And Erica from our team has put in the chat some links to upcoming webinars, links to our programs. And you can contact us if you're interested, and if there's something you want to change that you think you need more help with. we'd love to help you with that. So,
But
and
by
that's
the way,
the
just a quick one.
commercial. Yep.
Sorry, Greg, there's a little bit of delay. Sorry to interrupt you. There's I like what Arnie put into the chat around point 4. It is very, very important that we develop a clear view that is actionable in the moment, that is remembered in the moment of choice, of what it is that we're holding on to that is driving a particular behavior that we might need to let go of, so that we can be liberated to express the behavior that we would like to express. So thank you for that, Arnie.
Unmute. Well done. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Good, nice one. We'll add it so the next time we do it. Upcoming webinars tomorrow. We have one on becoming confident, and next week teaming faster, stronger, better. If you're interested in those, you're welcome to join. If you want to send someone else along the way, please feel free to refer them. And then we have some programs coming up in the new year. Things start regularly for us. We have a continuous sort of learning cycle. So what we'd love to do is just take the last few minutes that we have together. We've said we will keep you for about another 8 minutes, and you're welcome to leave when you're ready. But if you have any questions or things you'd like to share or go deeper on, then please feel free to ask. Our hope was you had some practical things. Maybe you chose something that you're going to try in order to experiment with. And we'd love to talk with you offline or online about that. But otherwise, any questions that you want to ask, please feel free to unmute yourself and have a go, or just throw it in the chat if you'd like to do that. Or if you're ready to share, hey, I want to experiment with something. What is that you might want to experiment with?
Can I just recommend the one you're having tomorrow on becoming confident? Because
Sure.
I listened into that one. Was it last month or so? And even if you think you are confident or you know what confidence is, it's really worthwhile. So recommendable.
Thanks, Aaron. Andrew will have a look at laddering. We do a little bit of that on some of the earlier coach training when we work with this questioning pattern where people say, well, I'd like this to be different. And we say, well, and then what would happen? And then what would happen? And what would that mean to you? That would be an upward sort of a ladder. We also do multi-dimensional laddering. So down, back 2 ways, forward 2 ways, and up in different ways. So there's lots of different approaches to that. So it's an interesting way just to help people discover. And sometimes we don't go far enough. Often coaches will just simply ask, what do you want? Instead, they answer that first question on that slide with the bag over the head, and they just start coaching that. But actually that might not actually be it's probably not what they want. And ability to go beyond that with skill just creates a lot more traction and acceleration in the coaching process. It's just more effective as a conversation.
The laddering.
I think.
Sorry, Andrew, please.
It was just around the laddering. Because how you explained it there, Craig. I might be doing it. Is the laddering along the lines of I want to feel or want to do this, and when you do this, then what happens? Then what happens? That's a laddering technique, is it?
That is one of them. There are 4 kinds of different ladders. For the purpose of this particular webinar, perhaps the most important ones are the upward and the downward. So the downward ladder, you would recognize it probably as the downward arrow, because it comes out of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, where we're asking ourselves around a particular behavior, what's the worst thing about stopping doing that behavior? What's the worst thing that could happen if I stopped doing this? Because we're telling ourselves a story that the worst thing, we don't know we're telling ourselves this story, but when you go all the way down the ladder, you're telling yourself you're going to die alone and poor if you can't stop doing this. If you stop doing this behavior or you did something different, there's a risk that you're going to die alone and poor. And of course, if you believe that you're risking going to die alone and poor, then you're not going to even think about doing it. Or it's going to create a very powerful emotional reaction that's going to block you from doing it. So that downward laddering, I think you're probably already familiar with from other work that you've done.
I'll have a little look at that a bit more. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, super. Yeah, and of course, upward, we're really trying to connect to that positive attractor, right? I'd love to be thought of this way. I'd love to be that way. I'd like to walk away from that kind of situation feeling like this instead of feeling like I feel now, right? Or I'd like to not take it personally when someone says something. I'd like to not react. And again, you're helping to undo many, many years of programming. That's why it's hard for us, right? It's challenging, but that's that sort of process. And that's why trusting relationships is so important. That's why coaching is so valuable, because we create that condition where we can have the kind of relationship where we can help a person explore. What do I really want? Instead, what I have upward. What am I really dreaded outcome? And what's my desired outcome? And now what do I do? That's kind of what
it's wonderful
we're helping people to go through.
It's really good when you do the downward. We tend to do the upward first because we want to get somebody into a positive mind frame. What's the best thing that could happen if I were to execute this behavior or change this behavior? What's the best thing that could happen? What are all of the things that I can get if only I could make that change? Which becomes a positive emotional attractor. And then we go into the downward side, which is, and what's the worst thing about making this change? And then you go down this ladder and people see that the stories that they're telling themselves are absurd. And not only are they absurd, they are designed to be protective, but they're dangerous, in fact, because they're stopping you from getting something that you really want. So therefore, this absurd story that you're telling yourself is actually is actually dangerous to you. It might be blocking a promotion. It might be blocking a relationship. It might be blocking you just being happy. So it's all about how you combine the upwards and the downwards and the backwards and the forwards. I mean, forwards is easy. It's always forwards. Just ask the question, and what happens next? When you do that, and then what happens, and then what happens, and then what happens. Backwards is what needs to happen before that. The classic question that we like to ask is, okay, so and what needs to happen before that can happen? And then just keep asking that again and again.
Well, super. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for connecting us a little bit more with that. If you'd like to learn how to use those models skillfully and lots of development, of course, then that's what we do on our advanced training program. And if you'd like to experience it, then we're happy to enter into a coaching relationship or refer you to one of our coaches who's also quite skillful and capable to help you to do that. So if you want to carry the conversation on, feel free to chat with us, connect with us, and otherwise, thank you so much for being here. And enjoy whatever's ahead of you in your day. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.